I'm Tenitra Batiste, and we're one step closer to the triumvirate being formed, I think.
I'm Aaron Freeman, and when are the Falcons going to hire GM?
I'm Jarvis Davis. As soon as I say so.
Rise up, A-Town. It's the Falcons Squad. Everything Atlanta Falcons every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the ATL. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Straight from the ATL, the Falcons Squad Show starts now.
Falcons Squad Show, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman, Locked On analyst Jarvis Davis, and hopefully we'll see her soon, Falcons senior reporter Tori McElhaney. But we know it is a super busy time right now, so we shall see. The Squad Show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. So the Falcons have several players up for year-end awards. Will make the case for why they should win. And Kevin Stefanski is bringing a couple of former Cleveland coaches to Atlanta. Are there any players he should bring too? We'll discuss also what has the squad been doing inside and what will they do when they're outside? Again, we'll talk about that. But first, let's talk about holdovers from the last regime. The Falcons announced they retained running backs coach Michael Pitre, senior defensive assistant Dave Huxtable, and assistant O-line coach Nick Jones. So, Jarvis, for you, how important is it that the Falcons retain those coaches, especially Michael Pitre?
Yeah, when you talk about continuity, right? Your best player is Bijan Robinson on the team, and if you can bring back his coach, I think that is absolutely amazing concept or amazing notion to do, because that's when you talk about your best player, and not necessarily that you have to cater to that player, but if you can bring a guy that he's familiar with, a guy he's had a lot of success with, a guy who I think is just a really good football coach. When you have guys stick around through multiple regimes, that means something. That means that he knows exactly what he's bringing to the table, and I think that for them to bring a guy like that back, I think it's a plus in my eyes for Kevin Stefanski.
Yeah, and Tori, we of course got the word that Michael Pitre would be returning, Dave Huxtable and Nick Jones as well. And for you, how important is it that the Falcons did retain these coaches, but especially Michael Pitre?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jarvis said it best. When you look at what Bijan Robinson has been able to do, when you look at the potential of potentially bringing somebody like Tyler Algier back into the fold, there's things that matter in terms of what the relationships are between those guys and Michael Pitre. So and also too, when you're just kind of breaking down scheme in terms of run game, what Kevin Stefanski does within his run game isn't completely dissimilar to what the Falcons have been doing with Bijan and Tyler for the last 4 years. So I'm not, to me, it makes complete sense that you would keep somebody around who, one, has the scheme under his belt, and two, has seen the level of success and camaraderie that he has with Bijan and Tyler.
Yeah. And Aaron, it's always complimentary to those coaches that the team decides to retain across regimes. And also we look at it from the perspective of, I think Jarvis and Tori both mentioned it, the continuity piece there as well. But yeah, for you, when you think about the coaches that Kevin Stefanski decided to retain from the last regime, I mean, how important is that for what this team is trying to do in 2026?
Yeah, I think, Kevin Stefanski made the same decision that Raheem Morris made when it came to Michael Pitre's job status. Obviously, Michael Pitre joining the Falcons back in 2022 under Arthur Smith, and he's basically like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah. This running back room is one of the best running back rooms in the NFL, so he's doing something right, so might as well keep it going. And then, Dave Huxtable was a guy that the Falcons brought in with Ryan Nielsen back in 2023. He's been retained. He had a lot of experience coaching at the collegiate level defensively for decades and whatnot, and has been bringing that experience to the NFL. And then you have Nick Jones, who was brought in by Raheem Morris from the Rams, serving under various offensive line coaches there as an assistant there. But several of those offensive line coaches, I know Kevin Carberry, who was the Rams offensive line coach, I think in 21 and 22 when Nick Jones was there, served under Bill Callahan as the assistant offensive line coach, when I think Bill Callahan was with Washington a decade ago with those offensive lines. So, you have these sort of connections that these guys have, but you also have, instances of guys like Pitre and Huxtable that are just really good coaches and, game recognized game, as they say.
Indeed. So the Falcons seemingly, and I put that in air quotes, seemingly wrapped up interviews for GM Friday. Eagles Senior Personnel Director Joe Douglas, Chiefs AGM Mike Bradway, 49ers Director of Scouting and Football Josh Williams, and Bears AGM Ian Cunningham on Friday. Of course, they also interviewed James Lipford, AGM from Houston, and Andy Weidel, AGM from Pittsburgh, Thursday. Let me ask you guys this first, and everybody can answer or just answer if you feel compelled to. But I'm just curious to know, first of all, are you surprised we haven't received an announcement about the hiring of a GM? And granted, we're going a little bit earlier today, so we're all kind of waiting with bated breath. But as of our show, no announcement just yet. Surprised?
Yeah, I don't think that. Yeah, I am, because I thought they would have wrapped this puppy up by the weekend, to be honest with you, because once we saw that Josh Williams and Ian Cunningham were brought in for a second interview, I was like, okay, all right, we're about to get an announcement pretty soon, because, according to some reports, those guys were the two that were in the front. They were front runners for the position. So it is intriguing that they brought in Joe Douglas. I was like, okay, all right, what we doing here, and when you think about going back to when we started this conversation about the pecking order and like the type of guy that you can bring in and hire for this spot, I said that a general manager who's been a general manager and made all of the executive decisions probably wouldn't want to take this job. But when I saw Joe Douglas come in, I was like, okay, is this the only option that he has to be able to pop back in and get an opportunity to get a job? So we can add that to the list. That general managers that they've been fired or let go, they might be trying to get back into in the mix to be able to make some of those decisions and not necessarily be the top end guy. So, but yeah, I'm definitely surprised by that. We haven't really seen it as we done that show. So it'll be interesting to see if it's made in the next 12 or 24 hours.
Yeah, Joe Douglas was a name that intrigued me as well. But are you guys surprised that, listen, I'm looking at my Twitter, I'm watching my email just to make sure we don't miss an announcement. But as of right now, no announcement on the GM for the Falcons. Surprised that we don't have that name. Surprised that we haven't heard that announcement just yet.
I am. I didn't, if anybody watched yesterday's Locked On Falcons, they knew I didn't really have much to say about the Falcons, because I assumed going into the weekend that we were going to be talking about the new GM hire. So I was just like, all right, let's come up with something to talk about for 5 minutes to start the show before we get into some Senior Bowl stuff. So clearly, I expected the Falcons to have a GM hire at this point in time, because I was definitely not prepared to talk about anything else on last night's Locked On Falcons.
I'll follow that up to say that, like, I also have been pretty surprised. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense. You have Matt Ryan in place. You have a head coach in place. You're the only team that is backfilling a general manager position. So I guess there really is, like, no real sense of, like, urgency from a competition standpoint.
True.
My main concern, though, is that the Senior Bowl is happening
True.
currently.
Also,
it's like literally happening this week, and then you have it's like things start moving pretty quickly once you get to the Senior Bowl. And so I think the fact that they don't have anyone in place just yet for even just like the Senior Bowl in general is kind of like a little like eyebrow raising. But again, like the other side of the coin is like they don't have to rush to a decision, because I mean, maybe they don't feel like they have to.
Yeah. And that's a great call on both ends, Tori, that on the one hand, hey, is anyone else really looking for a GM? Not. But on the other hand, you've got the Senior Bowl and some of those other bowls starting to loom large in terms of recruitment and just scouting, right? Or scouting, if you will. So yeah, I definitely think you make good points there as well. But I mean, Aaron, you mean you didn't want to talk about the encouragement to the Falcons fan base that, hey, you too might not be full on worst in the NFC South, but you could kind of do that worst or first thing that New England did. I mean, you didn't want to use that as encouragement?
T, I need to bring you on as a consultant for topics on Locked On Falcons, because clearly there was something a little bit more there that I could have talked about other than a Rich McCain conspiracy theory. So yes, yeah. You're right.
I'm kidding. I'm absolutely kidding. But yeah, I was thinking about that. It real talk, encouraging, like, yeah, you could see a scenario where you see what Mike Vrabel has been able to do, a quick turnaround there in New England that I don't think anybody saw coming from a 4-win team from 2024, right? And then you look at the Seattle Seahawks and just what Mike McDonald has been able to do in such a short time as well. Granted, they kind of had some pieces and they were 10-7, but they were the ones that were like right there knocking at the door last year. And then because of things that happened in week 17 and 18 with the Rams were able to kind of move on. So I don't know. I just kind of looked at it like, hey, Falcons, that could be you. Like, you could be a fan base that's talking about that next year, whether it's going to the Super Bowl or just making a playoff run, period. I think that was kind of the encouragement of what I saw from the two teams that made it to the big dance or the big game come 2 weeks from now. But Jarvis, like we said, the candidates have pretty much been stacked. We didn't get any notifications on Saturday or Sunday that there were more interviews. So you have to believe that these are the finalists. But the bottom line is this: Ian Cunningham still right there. So is this, we felt like for the last week or so, maybe before the Joe Douglas announcement, that Ian Cunningham was the candidate, kind of like the guy to beat. So for you, is this still his job to lose?
Maybe, because here's why I say that. Like, I think I try to look at indicators, just as far as like the pecking order and how the Falcons have been doing things. When we talk about the president of football position was out there, they brought in Josh Williams, they brought in Ian Cunningham. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. We know Matt Ryan is the leading candidate for that. But they announced very quickly that Matt was the guy. And then you heard some rumblings that those interviews may count as first interviews for a general manager spot. I'm like, okay, I don't know if they're going to be able to pull that off, but and then we find out that, you look at like the pecking order with Matt and him being looked at by the league as the lead top executive guy, and the Falcons not necessarily have to go through this whole process from a hiring standpoint, with as far as the Rooney Rule and all those things. I think that, when that notification, we got a notification that Ian Cunningham had done the second interview, and then they brought in someone behind it, that makes me give me a little pause as to say that he might still be the lead guy. Yeah, I feel like if you leave the building, now the Falcons then clarify as to whether or not those in-person interviews, but I'm assuming that it was. If you go interview someone, let them lead the building and go interview someone else. That makes me think that you still trying to do your due diligence, and he might not be the lead guy. He might still be a candidate, but he might not be the guy that you have to hire and will let walk out the door. And Tori make a good point too, being that this is the only open position, GM position. They feel like, this might be something to the fact that they just gonna take their time. Right?
Yeah, Tori, if you look at it, no rumblings or no announcements rather on Saturday, Sunday that there were additional interviews. So it at least seems like this is the final pool of candidates for the GM role. And when you look at who they did bring in on Friday, does it make you feel like, wow, that kind of makes things interesting? Like, Ian Cunningham is still there, but is it his job to lose, or do you think there might be a little bit more competition in the room now?
Yeah, I think that it goes back to my main point, the fact that there are not any GM openings at this point in time, like, I think it kind of means that you get your pick of the litter a little bit. Like, and I think that is good news for the Falcons. I think it's why potentially we are seeing this take a little bit longer, is because perhaps, the Falcons interviewed a couple of guys for the president of football. So they already have a rapport with them. They already kind of have a knowledge base of them. And now they have some new names to throw into the pot, some new guys that they've interviewed. Like, did one of those interviews kind of tilt or make them even think a little bit more about what they want in the direction that they want? I think that's kind of like potentially where we're at right now, is some good interviews with some really good candidates have kind of made them be like, okay, like, what's the best decision here?
Yeah. All we've heard was Ian Cunningham is kind of the front runner for, weeks now. And the fact that we've done this round of interviews and he hasn't gotten the job does give you a little pause in terms of whether or not that's true. Like, if he was the clear-cut front runner, they've interviewed him twice, once for president of football, once for GM, you would just assume, okay, time is now, make the move. But the fact that we're still sitting here, at least as of this moment that we're talking on the squad show, that move hasn't been made, then it does at least open the door that, maybe he is not as strong a front runner as we thought initially.
Indeed. So the Falcons have several players up for year-end awards. We'll take that under further review. This episode of our Falcons Squad Show is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to stay locked into every moment than with PrizePicks, the daily fantasy app, where it always feels good to be right. With football season coming down to its final stretch, now's the perfect time to close it out strong. PrizePicks makes watching the game even more exciting by letting you build simple lineups around player projections, no drafts, no waiting, just football action all the way through the playoffs. PrizePicks is incredibly easy to get started. Pick 2 or more players and choose more or less on their projections. And it makes watching games way more engaging, especially during the playoffs and the big game. So it's a great way to keep playing fantasy football even after season-long leagues are finished. Now, you can download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. So after you wrap the Falcons Squad Show, download that PrizePicks app today. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Thank you for making the Falcons Squad Show your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So, Tori, another AP nominee for the Falcons after it was announced Thursday that James Pierce Jr. and Xavier Watts are both up for Defensive Rookie of the Year. And, of course, talking about Bijan Robinson, who, along with Drake May, Christian McCaffrey, Puka Nacua, and Jackson Smith-Njigba, are finalists for Offensive Player of the Year. It'll be the first time a Falcon has won that award since Matt Ryan took the prize in 2016. But first things first, what did you think about JPJ and Watts both getting the nod?
I think it made sense. I think that it was well-deserved. I think when you look at what they had done as, let's just say, even individuals, like what they had done as individuals, they both earned a spot to be a finalist for the award based on their production, based on their availability, based on how much they were relied upon in their rookie seasons. So I think that, I know that there are some other names that probably get more of a hype and Ted McMillan and what he was for the Panthers. Like I get those things. But the fact that the Falcons have 2 of 5 individuals being a part of this conversation is, I think, huge for the decision that they made when they made it. Yeah. I know obviously everybody can kind of go back and forth about the trade for James Pierce Jr. and that being what it was, but you can't argue with the fact that these 2 individuals, which you did get in the trade, because Xavier Watts, that's a piece of it too. Now, granted, the argument could be made that he would have been wherever you were, but whatever. I think the fact that you are sitting there, it's almost kind of the justification you needed for the move that you made. But I think even if they weren't getting this recognition, that still was justification. And people can argue, whether or not that was the right move at the time. But I think just in terms of the players you got impact players, you got day one starters. Like you can't hope for anything more, I think, in a draft scenario.
Yeah, and I think, Tori, you make a great point. There's been so much commentary since last April, mostly on James Pierce Jr., if we're being honest, just in terms of, was it the right move to make? Was it the right move to make? Well, when you look at what his stats are, first of all, 17 games. I think that is important to note because your best ability is availability. So he was there for all 17 games this season. He was able to get 26 tackles, 10.5 sacks, 16 QB hits, and 5 PBUs. Pretty darn impressive for James Pierce Jr. as just a start, if you will. And when you look at what Xavier Watts was able to do, again, you look at 17 appearances, 17 starts, 96 tackles, 5 picks, 11 PBUs. I mean, it's pretty impressive what both of those guys were able to do. And like you said, even more impressive, Aaron, that from this class of 2025, that these guys are both able to be in the conversation for Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Yes, it's absolutely been devastating for my anti-rookie narrative that I've been pushing for years. And I think that the numbers kind of speak for themselves as you kind of laid out there, T. You have James Pierce leading the Falcons in sacks. You have Xavier Watts leading the Falcons in interceptions. Both of those guys were, supreme playmakers throughout the season. James Pierce really going on a tear in the second half of the season. And I think that's probably the main thing that's been preventing James Pierce from being the runaway favorite to win Defensive Rookie of the Year, just because he kind of has a really good half of a season as opposed to a really good whole season when it comes to that sack production. And so we'll see how the voters, ultimately feel on that. But I think both of these players came in. There were a lot of expectations that the Falcons would get, 4 plug and play starters on the defensive side of the ball. They delivered that. And both Xavier Watts and James Pierce were very opportunistic in terms of what they were able to do and provide for this defense. That was the goal. And they checked every box and lived up to the hype this season. And it's just, absolutely devastating for my brand. As I always say, you got to pump the brakes on the hype train with some of these rookies. And then, of course, these two guys live up to it. And now I can't, we got to buy the hype on whatever this upcoming rookie class is going to be, because there's no way you can put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah. And Jarvis, I will say, as much as Aaron doesn't want to be on the hype train for the rookies, I think it gave your heart so much joy to be able to talk about James Pierce Jr., especially as the season wore on, because one of the things you said was, hey, we just need somebody to get home. We need somebody to get home. But the other piece there was, the Falcons defense needed someone who could get turnovers, who could flip the field for them. And Xavier Watts gave them the opportunity over and over again this season as well. So great to see that both of those guys are being acknowledged for their contributions to a very strong defensive effort from the Falcons this past season.
Yeah, it was so interesting to watch, Xavier Watts and how he came along almost instantly. He was like, "Yeah, I'm here, guys." They probably should have took me a little bit earlier than where I went, with the Atlanta Falcons. But that's the interesting thing about this. All of these guys, right? Watts, Pierce, Walker, Bowman. That was the best draft class that Terry Fontenot had. He absolutely knocked it out of the park. You draft 4 starters in one draft. I don't care who you draft after that. Like Jack Nelson, hey man, God bless you, bro. If you on a practice squad, so that's a win. If you get 4 starters that you can build like a nice foundations for your defense, like that is just absolutely that is a nice gift. That's a nice parting gift for the next general manager and head coach, because that is one of those things where it doesn't necessarily really happen like that. And I even go back to, Thomas Dimitroff, when he had to get 4 starters or 3 starters in the draft and in that young 2016 defense, and they end up making a run to the Super Bowl. I even said, I was like, if these guys were coming into the season, I was like, if Fontenot hits on this draft, he could potentially do that. He did his part, but it didn't necessarily work out on the other side with Raheem Morris, as far as on the field, from on the field standpoint. So it just, But shout out to those guys for coming in, and because Pierce was being doubted, obviously Watts was being doubted because people, the talent level obviously was there. It's just that for whatever reason he fell so late in the draft. So, but yeah, for those guys to come out and perform the way they did and be like guys you can count on, unlike Aaron believes, on a consistent basis to be able to make plays for you on your defense side of the football, man, it's they probably just popping the collar a little bit. That's all. Just a little bit.
And think of what it could have been even for Billy Bowman Jr., who was only able to play 6 games before going out for the season. 15 solo tackles, a forced fumble, an interception, and 2 passes defensed. And I don't even know if that stat line really even shows the impact that he had before he went down for the season. So yeah, like you said, Jarvis, a nice class all the way around. And even Jalen Walker, we know that he dealt with some early challenges with that hamstring. So it took him a minute to kind of get to quote unquote 100%. But yeah, that entire 2025 class certainly could have been in the conversation had injuries not stopped them. But again, not just James Pierce Jr., Xavier Watts were acknowledged by AP as being finalists for those Defensive Player of the Year awards. Of course, recognition for Bijan as well as one of the finalists for the Offensive Player of the Year award. So Tori, I figured let's make the case for Bijan to win this.
So I actually have a story that's running a little later today, and it's kind of just like the case for Bijan Robinson to be named Offensive Player of the Year. And I think like my main argument is when you look at what Saquon Barkley did last year in being named AP Offensive Player of the Year. Yes, he rushed for over 2,000 yards. Like that in and of itself, I think he's only the 8th player in the history of the league to be able to do that. But technically speaking, Bijan Robinson had more yards from scrimmage than Saquon did in last year when he won the award. Christian McCaffrey is in the conversation as well. He is a finalist. Bijan Robinson had more yards from scrimmage than Christian McCaffrey did in 2025. So I think that like, if you're just going off of pure like yardage standpoint, like that's Bijan. The problem though is Bijan's the only name on this list that didn't go to a playoff. He's the only name that hasn't been playing for 4 weeks. Like he's the only guy who was a part of a team that is now changing leadership. Like I think that stuff matters to voters because it's a recency type of thing. And what have you done for me recently? And unfortunately, Bijan Robinson hasn't been in the news cycle for the last month. So I think like that's what's so difficult is like when you look at if the Offensive Player of the Year award is going to an individual that an offense couldn't like operate without, the Falcons in 2025 could not have operated to the way it did without Bijan Robinson.
Yeah.
Now, could the argument be made for like Drake May? I mean, gosh, he's leading a team to the Super Bowl. Like, yes, of course. But I think just in terms of Bijan Robinson and what he was able to do in the role that he had, which made up, I want to say like 45% of all Falcons like offensive production in 2025. Like that's for a running back, that's crazy. And I think that, I mean, you can't look at what Bijan did in 2025 and not think that it deserves as many awards as could possibly come his way.
Yeah. And Aaron, I was thinking a couple of the things the same as Tori. First and foremost, like it's difficult when you're on a losing team, right? And I mean, voters take that into consideration. The recency effect is important as well. Hopefully, maybe for James Pierce Jr. too, but the recency effect may actually work against Bijan Robinson because he hasn't been a part of the lexicon for the past couple of weeks, right? And then you look at the others who are in the playoffs. Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to the Super Bowl. Puka Nacua, if for just a few inches last night and getting out of bounds and giving Matt Stafford one more shot at the end zone, could have been going to the Super Bowl as well. So yeah, it's definitely a hill to climb, but certainly if there's anybody who is still deserving of it, you could say Bijan would be that person.
Yeah, absolutely. All these guys, have very strong cases to be made for Offensive Player of the Year. But if we're really just going to ignore, any sort of facts and data that support these other guys and just focus entirely on Bijan, I think Tori mentioned it, the numbers really favor Bijan a lot with the, sort of historic year that he had in terms of yards from scrimmage to 12th, I believe, most yards from scrimmage in NFL history, the most since Christian McCaffrey in 2019. So you're having a sort of historically significant year from Bijan in that regard. And then when you just think about those sort of like, we talk about it with college football, those Heisman moments where you have those national TV games where you can have those big games. When you look back at this season for the Falcons, that's really what sells you on Bijan and how great he was, because in a lot of those nationally televised games against Minnesota, against Buffalo, against the Rams late in the year, like Bijan had his best games. He was the dominant player. He was by far the best football player on the field in those games. And with those eyeballs, on him and the Falcons team that played well in those games, those were some of their best games that they played all season long. That's the sort of thing that gets you to maybe forego some of the other numbers when you look at some of the other candidates, and that eyeball test just factors the most in your eyes. And so if anybody's going to lean towards Bijan Robinson in this Offensive Player of the Year voting, it's going to be, I think, because they watched him, go for almost 200 yards against the Rams. And I forget how many yards he had against, I think it was over 200 yards against the Bills and whatnot. And the Falcons' dominance against the Vikings and probably some other games that I'm forgetting as well. That's just sort of the nature of Bijan Robinson, where he does these things. We joke about it all the time. He walks on water. And you just kind of like take it for granted. I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen that before, all right, cool, Mr. Guy that walks on water. But, I think that's really what sells you in Bijan, some of these incredible performances in front of national audiences.
For people who doubt that Bijan Robinson should get this award, I'll just ask him one question. And taking into account all of the injuries that the Falcons dealt with, at the wide receiver spot, mainly Drake London, where he played on 12 games this year. Darnell Mooney's inconsistency at the wide receiver position. Like who do they have to throw the ball to when they put 8 in the box? Who? Answer that question, and you can get an award to somebody else. And I can take it as a legitimate answer. You can throw Kyle Pitts in there, but he's a tight end. So we've seen offenses that depend on tight ends at their lead wide receiver. We've seen how that works. They don't normally work that well. So for me, it's all about answering that question. When teams say, hey, we're going to try to stop 7 by putting 8 in the box and see if you can block it, most of the time he came out on top. So, yeah, that's my case for him being Offensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, and Jarvis most of the time came out on top with, at times, especially on the right side of the line, a very ticky-tack patchwork type of O-line, and still he was able to do all of what he did. So yeah, pretty darn impressive. Yeah, right, exactly. Pretty darn impressive for Bijan Robinson, and hopefully he'll get the same consideration regardless of what happened around him with the Falcons and their record, but hopefully he'll get the consideration that he's really worthy of for the historic season that he had. Now, Kevin Stefanski is bringing a couple of former Cleveland coaches to Atlanta, but are there any players he should bring too? We'll talk about it next up. This episode of our Falcons Squad Show is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. So if you need to hire someone, say for a show, you can go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what you need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. And instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this Falcons Squad Show podcast. Now, terms and conditions do apply, but if you're hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. So, Aaron, we've talked about who Kevin Stefanski is bringing from his days in Cleveland, including OC Tommy Rees, no-line coach Bill Callahan. But are there any Browns players, besides Myles Garrett, of course, whom you'd love to see in a Falcons uniform next season?
Not really. I'll be honest with you. Not really.
Tell us how you really feel. Free.
I mean, I was, this is my type of exercise, T, where it's just like, okay, like what do the other teams have and what could be beneficial? I'm just looking over the Browns depth chart, and I'm just like, they obviously have a couple of really good rookies, Quinshon Judkins, Carson Schwarzenegger. And so if you were, twisting my arm, be like, okay, let's bring, Quinshon coming off an injury, to Atlanta to replace Tyler Algier and keep that 1-2 punch with Bijan going. Carson Schwarzenegger, a really good young linebacker, widely considered to be the front runner to win Defensive Rookie of the Year over James Pierce Jr. But it's like outside of that, like there's a reason why, Kevin Stefanski is the Atlanta Falcons coach, whether you buy into that reason or not. But the overwhelming sort of reason is that the Browns roster is not very good. It has not been very good. It has gotten significantly worse over the 6 years that he got there. And the roster that he had at the end was not a particularly good roster. Like, however many games they won, this year, last year, 4 games or whatever, like that's a 4-12 roster. It's like, it's basically like, 4-13 or whatever it was. It's like, it's Myles Garrett and a bunch of old guys. And I'm just like, yeah, no, thank you. You can keep them in Cleveland. I'm good. I'm good with the young talent that the Falcons are accumulating here in Atlanta. So I'm good on that.
So, Jarvis, now that Aaron has completely carved up and shut down the Cleveland Browns roster, is there anyone that you would say, hey, I'm hoping Stefanski will bring them to Atlanta to add to pretty talented roster that the Falcons already have?
Hope is a strong word, T. When it comes to talking about what I want off of the Cleveland Browns roster. But I have something that if I'm putting my GM hat on and I'm thinking about what the Falcons could potentially lose in a guy like Kyle Pitts, because he might just be too expensive. It's just too expensive. David Njoku, anyone? I will at least have a conversation, like, hey, man, how's your health? How you been doing lately? How the kids? How the wife and kids? You trying to play again? I got a 1-year deal, $5 million for you. You know what I'm saying? Like, what you trying to do? And then, I go into the draft and draft me a guy that I feel can be a starter for me. So just from that perspective, yeah, I would at least have a conversation just to say, because I'm preparing to lose Kyle Pitts in free agency. That's just me. Because, it's going to be hard for a lot of teams to watch 2025 and say, ooh, I'm going to pass on that. But you have, as a general manager of this team, you have to take all the years into consideration and say, all right, looking at this entire 30,000-foot view and looking at a guy that I did not draft and say, all right, is this guy worth $16, $17, $18 million a year? Yeah, I'm not doing that. So, yeah, I would at least try to see what David Njoku talking about, because he was one of those freak guys coming out, as far as like workout guys. He doggone you putting him in the front of the bus, when he gets off. Like, he's one of those dudes, right? So I would probably have that conversation and say, all right, I'm preparing to lose Kyle Pitts, and then so I would at least have a conversation with David Njoku on get him on like a nice veteran, close to vet minimum deal, and just go from there.
Yeah, because it's an interesting situation that he has, having signed a 4-year deal, but the contract was running through 2025. There's a serious cap hit in 26. but he's also said to become a free agent. So kind of interesting to see if that's something where structurally the Falcons, whomever the new GM is able to kind of pull that off. Because, I mean, Jarvis, you make a legitimate point. Kyle Pitts may not be with the Falcons next year. So maybe looking at Njoku and what he's able to do, obviously once getting past an injury, but what he's able to do for the Falcons could be good in Stefanski's new offense. But for you, Tori, is there anybody up and down that roster as the Browns roster was constructed or is currently constructed since they're done for the season, anybody that you think would be a good look for Kevin Stefanski to bring here?
I'm with Free here. No, I think my thing is I don't think that, so Kevin Stefanski, I don't think from a like schematic point of view is like, it's going to be difficult to find other free agents, other guys in the draft. Like, I don't think like offensively to run his offense, I don't think that you need like, it's not like when Arthur Smith came in and you knew he needed like these bigger body tight ends and you knew that there was going to be a lot of like, you know, even 13 personnel, you know, like he wanted to run out their big tight ends. He wanted to run out really big wide receivers. Like, that doesn't necessarily feel like that's the case within what, one, the Falcons already have, and two, what Kevin Stefanski is like coming in and bringing. I go back to even what the Minnesota Vikings were when he was the offensive coordinator for them. I just don't think that it's like too dissimilar to like what a lot of other places are running. So I don't think it's one of those things where it's like, oh, you have to find somebody who has played for Kevin Stefanski or Tommy Rees in the last 2 years in order to run this offense. Like, that's not at all the case here. It's not what I really think is even going to like move the needle. You need players that are going to move the needle for you. I'm talking wide receiver, talking tight end. Like, you need a backup running back if Tyler Algier is not going to be the guy. So I think that like for those reasons, you do have pieces that you need to go out and get and acquire, but I don't think it comes at the expense of like going after those specific types of players from the Cleveland Browns roster. So for that reason, I'm like, scour the whole league. Like, go find some guys who can actually come in and help you in your depth and in your ability to move the ball downfield. So it's also kind of why I'm still not completely like out on Kirk Cousins. Like, I mean, it's just not. And so despite the fact that that cap hit is what it is, like, maybe there's still something there with Kirk Cousins and Kevin Stefanski based on what they've done with each other in the past. So for those reasons, I'm not going into the Cleveland Browns locker room and being like, hey guys, come to Atlanta. That's not what I'm doing.
Yes. So obviously the squad show doesn't really have much love for the Browns roster and thinking that anyone pretty much from that roster can come here and do better than this roster as it's currently constructed, or for that matter, free agents that maybe the Falcons could get, or even players in the draft. But there may be some players on the flip side that you guys love that are currently here that you're hoping to see for the 2026 season. Free, do you think there are some Falcons players that Kevin Stefanski would also love to see remain in a Falcons uniform?
Sure. I think Tori mentioned one of them is Kirk Cousins, but you know, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. You know, when you look at this crop of free agents, I think the Falcons have a lot of good players that are hitting free agency. And I think in a world where the Falcons were coming off a winning season, a playoff season, there would be a high incentive for the team to try to keep the band together and try to continue building off of this thing. And I know because the team was so close to achieving that, you know, with how bad the NFC South is, there's going to be a desire to want to do that. But I do feel like when you look at this crop of free agents, for the most part, obviously Kyle Pitts is the one that really, really stands out in terms of being that sort of irreplaceable potential option. But as Jarvis has so eloquently put it on today's episode, he's a tight end. And at the end of the day, it's not that hard to find a capable tight end. And so I think the Falcons should be willing to let a lot of these guys test the market. And so I think you should be open to kind of completely remaking this roster with a new GM, a new president of football, a new head coach, and make it their own, as opposed to what has kind of been the through line the last couple of years, where it's been, okay, well, you got to, Raheem Morris kind of had to win with Arthur Smith's roster for the most part. Obviously, they made some changes at some key positions, but for the most part, it was the Arthur Smith roster that he inherited and kept through. And so, I think they should be open to letting these guys walk. Probably the one guy that I would probably sit here and pound the table that the Falcons need to resign is Zane Gonzalez, the kicker, just because he did so well for the team down the stretch. And he'd be, of all this list of players, like, you wouldn't have assumed that he would be the priority resigning, but he's probably the guy that I'm calling first to be like, hey, Zane, let's run it back. Let's see what you got. We're going to bring in some competition, but it's your job to lose. And he's probably the one guy that I would definitely be like, yeah, we got to get him back on the team of this group of upcoming free agents.
Jarvis, who do you think Kevin Stefanski would love to retain from this Falcons roster in 2026?
Hey, Kev, it's your boy, JD. Go ahead and sign the offer. Sign the offer, man. You need depth in the cornerback position. Aaron, don't make that face, man.
No, I was thinking about. Never mind. Go continue, Jarvis. I'm sorry. I was.
Come on, this the boy, man. When I do stuff like this, I'm doing it for a reason. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on.
That was not a face over what you were saying. It was something else.
Okay. All right, cool. You down there in Mobile, Alabama, already nothing up. I see. You know what I'm saying? I know she's sitting behind the camera, dog. It's all good, bro. Hey, bro, do your thing, dog. It's all good. But anyway, so I would look at the offer because, like, put my GM hat on. I'm thinking from a standpoint of, if I don't have to go out and get new depth, I keep the one that I have, especially if it's at a great price. I know you can keep the offer on a good price. I know you can keep Khalid Kareem on a good price. I like those guys. I love the way Kareem played towards the end of this season. Like, he's a solid player, a solid depth piece. Like, if you can build out the back end of your roster, and you can have, because those guys came in and filled in for you and did a really good job, specifically the offer. So I'm looking at guys like that. And another guy that I'm sure Tori is probably leaning towards this guy, but I want to at least mention him. Caden Ellis. Can you bring him back for a good number? So yeah, that's kind of where I am. Most of all on the defensive side of the football. The offense, hey man, we can go find a tight end. They can catch some balls, you know what I'm saying? That ain't no big deal.
Yeah, Jarvis really took the wind out of my sails by telling the world that I was going to pick Caden Ellis. Not that it probably wasn't super obvious, but I do that. I think it makes a ton of sense to bring him back for what he has been for the last couple of years with this defense. Particularly, I think his relationship with Jeff Ulbrich, if you're talking about like wanting to keep like continuity in place as much as you can amidst all the changes, I do think that bringing Caden Ellis back makes a ton of sense. It doesn't have to be a long deal. Like, again, he was just on a couple of years or a few years anyways. Like, but I think that he's somebody who, I don't know how much interest he'll draw from like a bunch of other places. I'm sure there will be interest there, but you do have to think about like that he's kind of aging out a little bit, comparatively speaking to some other interior linemen or interior linebackers. So I'm curious to see what happens if he does go on the market. But if I'm Jeff Ulbrich, I'm pounding the table to bring Caden Ellis back because of what he means to this defense and how easy it would be to just, to just bring him back. Like, to me, like, you do what you got to do to bring him back.
Yeah, you do. So what has the squad been doing inside, and what will they do when they're outside again? We'll download on that in the look ahead. This episode of our Falcon Squad Show is brought to you by Robinhood. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house, it's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. So futures and cleared swaps trading involves a significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. So the ice storm event, as far as what I can see here in South Atlanta, didn't really pack the punch that everyone thought it would. But for you, Jarvis, what'd you do to keep yourself busy while you had to shelter in place?
Make sure they had the heat on, had plenty of snacks for my wife and my babies, and we just kind of just kicked it, you know. But you know, I got a chance to watch, you know, some good football over the weekend, so that was good, you know, and watching these games. It really kind of hit on me, like what is going to make you turn into a contender pretty quickly, especially when you were talking about the Seattle Seahawks. I've always admired what John Schneider has done as a general manager. A lot of the players that he drafts, I like them a lot, you know, and he seems to have a type, you know, general managers who have a type, and that type is up front with the big dogs, the big boys. And when you gravitate towards those guys, and you'll sprinkle a Jackson Smith and Jigba in there mug from time to time, like I love that type of stuff. So for him to be able to build that team to where it is and get that defense back to not necessarily the Legion of Boom, but they are really, really good in free agency. You know, and getting DeMarcus Lawrence in from the Cowboys. It's just all of the moves just hit after hit after hit, and then you just see the product of it and see it on the field. It's just like, man, that was some good stuff. So I enjoyed watching some good ball this weekend.
Yeah, and Jarvis, not just who he was able to acquire, but the decisions John Schneider made to let go of players like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, who were produced for all those years. But you see what this offense is now as they departed, and they get somebody, like you said, like a JSN. Tori, anything fun that you did once you knew you had to shelter in place for a storm that, well, I keep looking outside because I'm like, it looks fine to me.
Yeah, no, I've been bored out of my mind the last couple of days, not really going anywhere. My lower back hurts from sitting on the couch. And honestly, I needed this time because things have been so crazy since honestly Christmas.
Yeah.
But it just showed me that I operate at a high frequency just in life. And when I don't have that high frequency, it kind of makes me feel like something's wrong. Yeah. So I will be excited to kind of get back to it this week. Hopefully with some introductions.
Yes. You know, Tori, I'm the same way. I literally was freaking out Thursday and Friday when they started saying, yes, you know, the meteorologists in our local media, yes, this could actually be a storm that cripples the city up through Wednesday. And I was like, me in the freaking house till Wednesday? Oh no, let me get these snow boots. I was look for my ski gear. No, sir, no, ma'am, I can't do it. I called my big brother. I was like, can I come camp out at your house for a couple of days, or at least I can have company with you and the dog? And so I was like, no, I can't do it, even through Tuesday. But then when they kind of sort of said, okay, Monday looks like the day, and then Tuesday we can return back to normal, I said, all right, I can manage through 48 hours. I can find stuff to do in this house. But yeah, I'm like you. I was like, I'm outside all the time. What the hell? Anyway, Free, you're already outside. So I'm just going to skip right over that because you're in Mobile. So clearly you found something to do with yourself over the weekend, which was make it down to Mobile, Alabama for Senior Bowl week. And speaking of that, you obviously already braved the weather. I think, Jarvis, you're about to brave the weather to get down to Senior Bowl. And Tori, are you headed down there this week as well? Good for you. Good for you, because you deserve a break. You totally deserve a break.
It's a goal of mine in life to not go to Mobile. Like, it's, not that I don't think Senior Bowl is important. I do think it is, but I personally, like, I'm okay. I feel bad saying that, knowing that Free's currently sitting in the great city of Mobile, Alabama.
Yeah. And hey, guys, we're going to shift gears. I'm going to call an audible for the three of you. It looks like we have a new special teams coordinator, Craig Ackerman. That was announced today. So I want to get to that real quick and get you guys' thoughts on that, because I will say this, Jarvis, as you were talking about watching the games last night, obviously it's a game of inches. And if Puka Nacua could have gotten just a few more inches, gotten out of bounds, that could have been a different game. But that said, really where that game started and stopped was the fact that Seattle had it right in all three phases. The Rams have been struggling. They fired their special teams coordinator back in December, and you saw, unfortunately, that third phase of the game kind of do them in. That said, we also saw what it did to the Falcons, almost game in and game out through the course of 2025. So it's now official that they've moved on from Marquise Williams. Craig Ackerman is indeed going to be the special teams coordinator.
Yeah, we were having too many conversations about the special teams and their coverage ability. And Raheem Morris openly talking about he had two phases get it done, and specialty wasn't one of them. Of course, that's verbatim, but that's pretty much what he said. Like, that's just unacceptable, especially when it comes to that particular unit, because you gave roster spots specifically for guys that played special teams for you, and that was it. They didn't give you anything on either side of the football. When you have those type of gifts, so to speak, put in your lap, and you don't do anything, you don't produce with them, you got to make a move. So I think just from, if Craig Ackerman can just simply stabilize this unit, I feel like the Falcons are being much better shape than they were last year.
Yeah, Tori, and this is one of those where you kind of look and you say, okay, obviously Tommy Rees, offensive coordinator for Kevin Stefanski, that he brings from the work that they did together in Cleveland. The organization, the Falcons, determined that they wanted to and would retain Jeff Ulbrich. So now that final piece is in place here with Craig Ackerman being the special teams coordinator.
Right. Yeah. And there are some other movements that are going on right now too. Mm-hmm. That's kind of why I've been a little spacey today, but
no, we're kind of watching as well. So we totally get it.
Yeah.
Along with Ackerman bringing in Bob Quinn as the senior advisor to the head coach. That's an interesting position. I'm curious to see kind of like what the breakdown is with that.
Yeah.
Bob Quinn having been a former general manager himself with the Detroit Lions. And then on top of that, bringing in Robert Prince for a wide receivers coach, and then retaining Nate Ollie, retaining Justin Hood, retaining Kevin Koger. Like, all those are kind of, that's the bucket of announcements that have been made to this point. So I think everybody out there who was worried about Nate Ollie being snatched up, you don't got to worry, he's coming back.
Yeah, as Jarvis smiles from ear to ear. And you're right, Tori, we had a couple of comments placed in our chat even this morning where people were like, so any word on Nate Ollie? So now we have that confirmation, because we know that he is another guy who has contributed so much to what the defensive success was for the Falcons. And you really just want to keep that consistency there as well. So Falcons announcing some pretty good moves, whether it's retaining or adding to Kevin Stefanski's squad this morning. So Aaron, when you think about some of those announcements of individuals who have either been added to Kevin Stefanski's team or who've been retained for his coaching staff, what do you think about some of those moves?
Yeah, I think Ollie's the big one in terms of, what he's bringing to the table for this Falcons defensive line. You're getting a lot of the continuity back on defense with Justin Hood coming back in the secondary. We'll see what Craig Ackerman does to hopefully upgrade that special teams unit. A lot of reasons to be optimistic there. And then getting another sort of experienced GM in the building, and Bob Quinn, to potentially serve as a consultant of some sorts with, potentially Matt Ryan and whoever the Falcons hire as their new GM, being, first time in that role, having at least somebody who's, gone through that. I think it makes a ton of sense. So I think this staff is really coming together for Kevin Stefanski.
Yeah. Good call outs on the senior advisor position with Bob Quinn. And in addition to hiring Craig Ackerman as a special teams coordinator, Nate Ollie returns as well. And Jarvis, since you have been waving the Nate Ollie flag all of last week, waiting with bated breath as we argued about what NO really stands for. But I'll give you the last word on Nate Ollie.
In the famous words of Stringer Bell, I want y'all to put the word out. We back up, baby. That is one of the most exciting things I've heard in this offseason. When, from Kevin Stefanski, not really being a fan of it, but I don't hate it. I didn't hate the hire. When you talk about where Ollie has been, wherever he's been, he's had success. Teams have done well. The man knows what the heck he's doing when it comes to coaching these D-line and edge players. So for me, I feel like that is absolutely huge. To have him back in the fold, it makes a total sense. And, hopefully, that came with a nice little bump. You know what I'm saying? Like, a little extra change, you know what I'm saying? Like, I want to see Nate pull up in something, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, man, got me a little raise, baby. We're going to go out and get a little something, hit these streets for a little bit, see what's going on. But stay focused, Nate. You know what I'm saying? Stay focused.
Yeah, don't be like Jarvis when you get back outside Nate Ollie. Yeah, don't be like Jarvis. When you get back outside Nate Ollie, just focus on your focus. Okay? Thanks to our everydayers for making the Falcons Squad Show your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host Aaron Freeman as your second listen. The Falcons Squad Show and Locked On Falcons are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We'll see you next time.